in this webinar in order to talk you about the restoration of temperate forests in South America, specifically in Chile, the country where I live, where I do my research, where I work. And today I want to speak or talk about the challenges that has our country, Chile, in the context of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and also some approaches or ideas that we are working with our research group that deal with how to improve the quality of the restoration that we are studying or implementing in the field. So we live in a world where the human has direct impact on ecosystems, and in a world where there are no more or very few biographic barriers, a world where less than 25% of the Earth surface remains free from human alteration, a world where somehow like 90% of the wetlands are lost in the last 300 years. And one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss is the destruction of the habitats. But a good news is that habitats can be recovered through ecosystem restoration. Everywhere in the world, there are some experiences, or there is evidence, for example, in Nepal, in South Africa, Australia, United Kingdom, and also in Chile, that we can recover the habitats through ecosystem restoration. And some scientists last year also said that ecosystem restoration is one of the most promising actions to confront climate change. In this context, we all know that the United Nations declared like 3 years ago or 4 years ago that this decade where we are living now is the decade on ecosystem restoration. And so we come to the temperate forests of South America. As all the forests or the main forests of the world, temperate forests in South America, they are also facing problems, conservation problems, because of deforestation, degradation, land use change, also problems because of climate change. And these forests are very unique. And why? Because here you can see in this map of the southern cone of South America, in purple you have the temperate forests. They cover more than 2,000 kilometers from north to the south, and they are separated from the rest of South America because of the Andes range, that you can have mountains up to 7,000 meters. You have the Atacama Desert, the most driest desert in the world. And also, there are some semi-arid land barriers, like the Mediterranean area in central Chile, or the Pampa or the steppe in South Argentina. So these forests are under strong biographic isolation, and therefore, since last glaciation, they have or present very high endemism. And the nearest wet forests, they are more than 2,000 kilometers far away in South Brazil and North Argentina. Here you can see some of these forests. Also, they are very heterogeneous in this strip of 2,000 kilometers. Somehow they share that they are, most of them, they are dominated by this famous Nothofagus species. In the left side, you have, for example, old growth North Patagonian forests in Chiloé Island, very complex, as you see, with non-vascular species, but they are dominated by Notophagus nitida. And in the right side, you have Notophagus pumilio forests in South Patagonia and Torres del Paine National Park that are maybe a little more simple, like in the forests in the Northern Hemisphere. What happens is that there are some estimations that in the last 450 years, we have lost somehow like 50% of the original area of this forest. Especially these estimations are for the northern part, that is called the Valdivian rainforest ecoregion. So we have lost somehow like 50% of the original area. Here you can see some very nice or really terrible pictures of the landscape in the 19th century or in the beginning of the 20th century. And there are some estimations that in that years, somehow like between 13 to 21 million hectares were burned. And also in that years, there are some estimations that somehow 50 to 60% of the coast between Valparaíso, that is the main harbor of Chile near Santiago in central Chile, to Cautín, was eroded. So it's incredible how the effect of destroying the forest, you have here no soil, full of erosion. But this process of forest ecosystem destruction went to the south, more and more to the south, and here there are some pictures of the 20th century, 1930, and you see the same happening more in the south in the Araucanía region. And also, the problem is nowadays, these are in the right side in color, you can see some photographs that are very similar as the photographs of 100 years ago, but they are now 5 years ago in North Patagonia, and this is especially in Chiloé Island where I live. So the same is happening now. Maybe not so strong as in the past, but it's still happening. Also, we have really nice places like this. This is a very famous photograph of the Torres del Paine National Park, the most famous park in Chile, that received somehow like 300,000 tourists per year. But in this national park, we had in the last decades 3 big wildfires. In 1985, 14,000 hectares were burned. 2005, 15,000 hectares. And 1 decade ago, almost 18,000 hectares were burned because of tourists and what they do and when they go for a walk. So the effect of tourism also in the ecosystem, forest ecosystem, is very strong. And maybe the worst happened like in the summer of 2017. We had the worst wildfires in the last 50 years. Almost 600,000 hectares were burned. And the problem that was in the place with more population in Chile. We have like 18 million people in all the country, and somehow like 10 million live in the place where this happened. But not only population, human population lived there, but also was the place with more, it's the place with more species richness in Chile. Yeah, so a really important place in Chile was totally burned. Yeah, but not all the things are terrible. Yeah, a good thing is that after this wildfire, as never seen before, the Chilean society wanted to restore its forests, and therefore with in the context also of the UN decade of ecosystem restoration, Chile has really huge international and national commitments in restoration. Yeah, for example, by year 2030, we have to reforest at least 200,000 hectares. From them, 70,000 hectares, they have to be with native species. That says our NDC, the NDC of Chile. And also, according to our landscape restoration national plan, by year 2030, 1 million hectares have to be under restoration processes. So it's a huge area, yeah? And according to our Chilean forestry policy, by the year 2035, we have to restore at least 500,000 hectares. So 200,000 hectares, 1 million hectares, 500,000 hectares are huge numbers. Yeah. And with many colleagues, we ask ourselves some years ago, will be able to do this? Do we have the human and technological capacity to implement restoration plans at a broad scale? And why? Because the current state of forest restoration in Chile is this. In the temperate zone, we have somehow like 100 restoration initiatives in the temperate regions. So very few. Most of them use artificial regeneration. They are really relatively small experiences. The main experiences are less than 10 hectares. And when we speak about monitoring these experiences, most of them are only evaluated in terms of survival. If the plants that we establish survive the establishment phase, and the early growth for the first 5 years after establishment. So very short in time. And therefore, with some colleagues and other studies, we established that why or which are the main bottlenecks for the restoration in Chile? Which are the bottlenecks that are there, and therefore we cannot, in restoration cannot be something that you see everywhere, yeah? And one that is from 2018, is a study in restoration ecology. We said that there is a lack of a national plan for forest landscape restoration. We said that also another bottleneck was that there was a poor quality and low supply of native plants in the nurseries of Chile, through all Chile. Also, if we had the seedlings or the plants to establish in the field, we had poor results in the establishment phase. And the fourth bottleneck, that is from another study, is that also we had a lack of adequate seed supply. So therefore, we have a really strong interest to restore the ecosystems, but we have these bottlenecks that do not permit that this interest comes to reality. The good thing is that in the last years, there is some advance. Yeah. For example, we have now a national restoration plan at the landscape level since like 1 year. So that is fantastic. And the idea of this national plan is to create a landscape that are, or to restore resilient landscapes. Yeah. But for many people, it's strange because it's not a plan of ecological restoration, but about landscape restoration. Regarding the stocks of seedlings in the nurseries, there is no significant progress. Yeah, here you see the plant stock in the nurseries the last years, and there is an increment in exotic plants. We produce, like the nurseries in Chile, like 100 million seedlings per year. That is the 90%, because native seedlings are only 11%, so 11 million seedlings. But the problem is that there is no tendency or increment in the years in seedling production. 90% of these seedlings are tree species, and 70% of all these tree species correspond only to 10 tree species. So this is a huge problem. And with these numbers, we need 160 years to come to the challenge of the 200,000 hectares. So we need much more than for the year 2030. About the establishment of tree species, the last years we have developed a lot of knowledge, and we know really how to plant native species. But the problem is that the planting rate came down in Chile the last 14 years. For example, here you see the statistics from the Forest Service, how many hectares are planted in Chile since year 2000 to 2021. And you see that from 2010, in 2010, we planted 20,000 hectares per year. From them, somehow like 2,000 were not from pinus or eucalyptus, exotic species. And in year 2021, only 600 new hectares of land were planted. Only 360 were with native species. So with this plantation rate, we need 195 years to reach the 70,000 hectares with native species. So we are far, far, far away. And also the problem of the lack of adequate seeds is continuing nowadays. And it's because informality, there is few information about the seeds and how to produce the seedlings with these seeds. We don't speak about seed transfer zones and whatever. The traceability of the seeds, there are no standards to collect the seeds, and along, etc. Yeah. The Chilean Forest Service and some other institutions, universities, and NGOs have worked on these topics, but only at the local level. So what is needed to reverse this situation? We must move forest restoration from a theoretical discipline to practice. Yeah, this is a huge topic, and we can speak hours about this. But we must look for strategies that allow us to reduce the costs and cover larger surfaces. Also, be innovative in what we do, and give to the people that live in the land certainties and real expectations, because restoration is something that, at least in Chile, is something very expensive, yeah? And the results are uncertain. So it's a very bad combination. And therefore, I think that something that we need and urgent is economic incentives for restoration in Chile. Also, we have to accept, or we have to think that there are other restoration approaches, not only artificial regeneration. Much of the discussion at the professional and academic level is based on just one restoration approach, artificial regeneration. And we have artificial regeneration on one side, natural regeneration at the other side, and assisted regeneration in the middle, like a mix. There is no much information about what is happening with natural regeneration in Chile, but somehow, in order to have an idea of the potential of this approach, if we count the total amount of natural forests in Chile, 30% are second growth forests that come from a disturbance, so somehow like 4.5 million hectares. And they are probably less than 100 years old. So if you think about that, in the last 100 years, 4 million hectares were recovered by natural regeneration. So the potential is very high. One thing that also that we have been working and that it's our now like our focus research is, are we just planting trees, or are we restoring the functional forests of the future? Because restoration is not only planting trees. So some aspects or ideas in order to improve the quality of the forests that we are restoring is the following. First, are we restoring ecological or ecosystem integrity? Ecological restoration aims to restore ecosystem integrity. So we have to evaluate restoration success by assessing all aspects of ecosystem integrity in restored areas, not only the early performance. For example, much of the research that I have done the last 10 years is only on early performance, but not about the integrity of the forests that we are restoring. So we have to study aspects, the three aspects of biodiversity, so structure, composition, function, and there are many attributes. I will not speak about all of them, but density, height, DBH, structure, the age, so structure, also the composition, species richness, and so on, and diversity, and function, like natural regeneration, the nutrient cycling, this composition, the adaptive capacity, and so on. So are we restoring all these attributes or not? And one example that I wanted to show you is this Puacura experimental forest in Chiloé Island, where I live. In 2014, like 90 hectares of land that was burned and then covered by exotic shrub species named Ulex europaeus. We planted 90 hectares with 12 different native species. Yeah, so in 7 stands that you can see here. Yeah, so this is like a view of how these shrubs are there. These all very nice yellow Ulex shrubs. We remove them with a lot of machines and so on. In 2014, this was an image of that year. You see all the 12 native species planted here, very dense in order to fight against the recover of Ulex, this exotic species. And this was 2014. This was in 2016. This was in 2018. So you see how the forest developed. Here in 2018, you can see some flowers of some tree species. That is also a function. And this was 3 days ago in the same place. So you see that the forest is huge. And when many people in Chile say that native forests, they don't grow, this is not, is false, because they grow if you do the things in a good way. And a typical evaluation of early performance in this place would be something like this. For example, after 7 years, you see here the different stands, and I can see, this is the mean tree density, the basal area, the DBH, the height of the different stands, the percentage of healthy seedlings, and also the biomass of each of the stands. And I can say these stands have a better performance than these ones. But all this information that is very interesting about early performance give us no information about if we are recovering the place. And therefore, a good option, for example, we use a method that we saw in a paper of Ray Benayas some years ago. And it's about how we can monitor with these response ratios the ecosystem integrity. So you have here the same information for each of the 7 stands, and we have some attributes of structure, of composition, and function. And you can see here for each stand if the attribute needs more recover, if we are okay, because if you are in 0, the 0 is the level of the reference. So if it's in 0, we have recovered the attribute. So we can see that in structure, in function, we need more time to recover that attributes, but in composition, there are some attributes that are full recovered. And if we mix of all the stands, we can come to results like this, where we can say that after 9 years in this place, we have restored composition, is similar to the reference, but we are far away in structure in recovering function. So this type of information in the monitoring give us an idea if we are doing the things well or wrong. Another thing is that we need is the use of the reference models. Yeah, reference models, if you don't know, is a reference model is the condition that the ecosystem would have been in now if degradation had not occurred. Yeah. So when we are in the front of an ecosystem, a forest ecosystem that is burned like this, the professionals in the field, they think, we have to restore this forest, and we want to go to an old growth situation like this. The problem with this is that maybe first we need like 1,000 years to come to that state, old growth state. But also maybe the macrosite conditions or the site conditions and also the macrosite the conditions are not the same as here. They have changed. So many times maybe it's somehow like impossible to come back to this or to go, because it's not going to the past. I cannot go to here. Also the tree species or the species in general that are in this forest are not early successional, so it's difficult to establish them in the field. So my opinion is that this would be not a good reference. And why? Because we have to think that forests change in time and space. Yeah, you have here like the development of a forest. Here in the top right, you have an old growth forests that after it comes a wind and you have a gap here. So in this disturbance, a lot of energy was released, and then we come to another state, an early successional state, that is this gap is also called reorganization state. And from here, then with time, we come to a mid-successional stage with a lot of competition. It's also called exploitation state. And then we go again to an old growth situation or a conservation state. So it's somehow all the forest ecosystem function like this. And restoration is also change in time and space. So we have a disturbance like fire here. We come to this early successional state or reorganization state. Almost all experiences in Chile, we applied restoration here in this early successional state. Also, we can have some, if we wait, we come to this stage, but also we can apply the restoration in this kind of situations. or also in this kind of situations, in old growth, for example, high graded forests. And in this context, what we should do is to set the reference should be set to the corresponding successional state. So if I am in this successional state in the beginning of my restoration, I should compare, or my reference should be an early successional state in the reference. If I am here in a mid-successional stage, I can have this as reference. And also when I'm in an old growth degraded forest, I could have like old growth reference state. Also, I could monitor if my restoration site is more similar to each of them of these situations. Yeah. So it's a dynamic reference model. Also, what we have seen is that different, in some experiments here in Chile, and it's something really obvious, but it's not well done in the field, is that different functional groups have different requirements when planting. For example, in Chile, you see that we use shelters for protecting the seedlings everywhere, everywhere, from the central Chile to extreme south Chile. You will see, if you see restoration experiences, you will see shelters, yeah. And here, for example, we have this Notophagus dombeyi pioneer species, and our experiment says that we have planted without shelters and with shelters, and there is no effect of the shelters in the performance of the trees. So if you think that if you plant 1 hectare with shelters, you will pay 2 times the money, or the costs are 2 times as if you do without shelters. So with pioneer species, you should not include the shelters in the management protocol. But if we plant late successional species, then there is really a good reason in order to use shelters. For example, here with Extoxicum punctatum is a typical late successional species of Valdivian forests in North Patagonia. You see that without shelters, after 3 years, we have no plant, it's totally dead. But if we use shelters, you see that the plants are much better, yeah? And also, there are different plantations designs or restoration designs, and each of them for different situations. Also, in Chile, if you see, we are always speaking about cluster planting since, I think, 10 or 15 years. And you see cluster plantings also everywhere. But the design of the plantation is site-specific, and it's depending on the management objective. So, like in this photograph, if you want to control invasive species like this one, like Ulex, you need to remove that and implement a restoration with dense and systematic planting, yeah, in order to control the invasive species. But for example, after wildfires in national parks, where really you don't have a very pioneer exotic species that will invade and will control the system, it's a good idea to create or to implement a cluster planting. And why? Because you can select in the field the best macro sites to plant them. And so this is in the case of Nothofagus pumilio forests in Torres del Paine National Park in extreme south from Chile. These are, in the left side, you can see a old growth forest. They have a regeneration mode of gaps. They have a gap dynamic. So we can imitate the natural dynamics of the forests and establish these clusters, very dense clusters with Nothofagus pumilio, and protected with these biological legacies, and we can have very good results. Also, and this is the last thing, is that the spatial patterns of the tree species can help us also to design plantation designs based on the natural dynamics. For example, here we have in our reference sites, we have mapped, this was a lot of work, I remember, in the forest. Each point is one tree in 1 hectare. And you can see the spatial pattern of each of the dominant species. And here in the bottom of the slide, you can see the same, but grouped by functional group. So we can imitate or replicate these patterns in the field. And for example, here you can see a photograph of an experiment that we have established 2 years ago, and you see the different patterns of the species in the field. And so we can imitate the dynamic of the different species when we implement the restoration plans. So, to finish, the take-home message of this talk, because the idea is, I hope, to discuss some of these ideas with questions, is that the idea of the international restoration commitments is not just summing area with planted trees, but to restore forests that are functional in the future. And to achieve this, we should incorporate natural regeneration as a valid restoration approach, not only artificial regeneration. We have to evaluate restoration success based on ecosystem integrity and not only early performance or how many seedlings survive after 2 years and so on. If the reference must be set to the corresponding successional or succession state, take into account the requirements of the different functional groups. And last, we have to adjust planting designs to different restoration objectives and try to imitate the natural dynamics of the forest. We don't have to forget the forest dynamics, yeah? And that is my presentation. And we are beginning now with my research team for the next 4 years. I'm very happy with this project because we will be working in all the temperate forests from the north and here in Concepcion area, in Cayumanque Mountain, in Puacura, in Chiloé Island, and Torres del Paine National Park, and we want to integrate the study of structural, compositional, and functional aspects of ecosystem integrity. And why? With the objective of evaluating restoration success after fire along all the temperate bioclimatic region. So if you want to know more about this project, you can scan this code here in the left, and also you can see in my research gate that is here, Jan Bannister, about all the research that we are doing here in the south of the world. So I hope that you like the presentation, and I'm totally open for questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Jan, for your talk. It was very interesting. And we have a couple questions here in the Q&A box. I remind there to all the participants that you put your question into the Q&A box. And we have two questions from France. The first one is, have you explored carbon credit mechanism to improve tree planting rate? And the second one is, what is the state of national carbon market framework under Paris Agreement Article 6.2?
Wow, that is very interesting questions, and really I'm not related to that with the carbon market topics and so on. So really, if the people that is asking that, you can send me an email and I can contact you with colleagues that are working on that topics. But really, I'm not the I'm not confident to give a good answer to this with the carbon things. So sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, we have other question from Jeff Brown, and it's, has there been any effort to plant a small amount in several yards apart so that you have not only species diversity but age diversity?
Oh, that would be great to do. I think we are in the first, and you have to think in Chile, we are for us. So how can I tell? For us, is a huge challenge to plant. So we are trying to increase the amount of area that we plant. So if we plant, is a good result. To plant in different ages, it would be great, but we are very far away from that techniques. We would need more time to do this, because for example, the most oldest restoration experiments are maybe 10-15 years old. Maybe we are trying, for example, in order to include different ages and how they perform in the time, we are using experiments from different years, but we have never planted seedlings of different ages in the same place.
Great. Also, we have a question from Agustin Valenzuela. He improved the question, so I'm gonna read the second one. And is, what is the best way to monitor and what variables are important to measure or quantify?
Yeah, that it's interesting because it's something that we are working now. For example, the last 10 years we were monitoring early performance, and that it's monitoring survival variables, how much they grow the seedlings, for example, in height, in diameter, in the root color diameter. A good variable for early performance has been the vitality of the seedlings, because sometimes if you measure the vitality, and we measure the vitality as the percentage of the canopy that it's green, for example, or of living, the percentage of living canopy, and that gives you an idea what will happen next year. So maybe you have no high numbers of survival or of mortality, but you have a high number of seedlings that are with a low vitality. So you know that next year you will have problems. This is, we measured this the first, second, third year up to 5 years. What we are trying now is to go to experiments that are 10 or 12 years old, that maybe they are more in a mid-successional phase. And there we try to monitor this ecosystem integrity. And what we measure there is in structure. Really, we measure the same as with early performance. So the height of the trees, the diameter, basal area, biomass, blah, 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 all these things. Then we are trying to include in the composition part, not only tree species, but also other vascular species and life forms, yeah? Also in composition, you could include also a diversity index. And in the functional part, that is the most, for me, the most interesting, because it's really new for me, is, for example, the typical function that we measured since always is natural regeneration inside the restoration site. So we can plant trees, but then we see that the birds are coming, and then you have natural regeneration of other species. That is a very important function. So if you can restore natural regeneration, then you will be happy. But it's not only natural regeneration, it's also, for example, the decomposition. So the fungi communities in the forest, in the soil, in the dead wood, or in the living trees. This is also a nice function. Also, for example, the adaptive capacity to the disturbance that the forest will face in the future. So there are a lot of variables that you can monitor, and I think one of the big problems is that, yeah, I work in science, I can monitor these things, but in practice, there is no money to monitor so many things. If you have a company and you are paid to monitor the forest, you will need money to monitor very complex variables. So the idea is at the end to say these are the most important variables that you have to measure in order to have an idea, a general idea of the ecosystem integrity.
Great. We have other question from Jeff, and it's related with invasive species. The question is there a way to remove or suppress the unwanted invasive species, controlled born, without destroying the microbiome with traditional agriculture process, like plowing?
Can you repeat the question? Is because that with agriculture was, I didn't understand.
The agriculture process, like plowing. Plowing.
What is plowing?
Oh, so plowing, like using a tractor to plant seeds in rows.
Arar la tierra?
Yes. Yeah, what I saw some photographs with plowing. That is true. It depends, I think, on which is the invasive species. For example, our experiences with Ulex europaeus. This is a shrub that is really terrible. In that case, I think I don't know any other option that remove all and then plowing the land, and also plant very dense and with very pioneer species that can grow very fast and produce shadow. I have seen people trying with shrubs, and they cannot fight against these invasive species and other techniques, but the only option with this very aggressive invasive species is to be also aggressive with the restoration. If you have other invasive species that are not so aggressive, then you don't have to be so aggressive also. You can plant with clusters, you can select the places where you will restore and leave the other areas for natural regeneration, whatever. I think my message is that if the invasive species is too aggressive, you have to respond also aggressively.
Great. We have other question from Ronald, and it is possible to bring on board all actors doing landscape restoration for benchmark, visit, or share experiences?
So if it's possible to bring the people to see,
yeah, like all the stakeholders in terms of landscape restoration.
We are doing, we as Instituto Forestal, Forest Research Institute, we are doing that. We meet with people that is interested in restoration. We go to the field. We do these field days, trips, and we are always totally open to make workshops about restoration. And our idea is to foment that the restoration reality is in the country, and it's difficult, but we are trying to do that.
Great. We have other question from Paul, and is: do you have much damage to your planted tree seedlings from rodents or other animals?
Yeah, that is a nice question, because when we in Chile, you have always browsing from cows and sheep and so on. That it's because we have a problem there between what is forest and what is agriculture and animals. So, and we have a lot of browsing, and therefore when we restore or when we restore a place, we always have to put fences. Yeah. And it's something that we always do. And if you don't do, you will have problems with that. But in the continent, I live in an island here. In the continent, there are also problems with rodents. And in that case, shelters are very good for that. The problem is that we have also native animals that browse the seedlings. For example, here where I live, we have a very small deer, the pudu deer, and the pudu deer is a vulnerable species that damage the vulnerable trees that we are planting. And it's terrible because we are trying to restore with seedlings that are of a vulnerable species that are damaged by a vulnerable deer. So with that, you can do anything. So you have to accept that you will have damage and that you will restore the land. But damage from browsing is a factor that you have to take into account.
My goodness, thank you so much, Jan. We're out of time. There's many more questions that came in, some interesting comments in the chat. I wanted to read one for you since you weren't able to see the chat. This is from Dr. Shankar Deb from Kolkata, India. And the comment was, today's session is just mesmerizing. So many lovely things are being presented, feeling happy to know them. So on behalf of all of our participants in IUCN-CEM, we're really just so delighted that you shared your time with us today. We will be posting your video. It takes about a week or 2 weeks to get the videos posted. I put the link to the YouTube channel in the chat for participants who want to subscribe. If you subscribe and click the bell icon, you get a notification when the videos go up. Next month, our webinar will be on October 20th, And the topic is, it's funny for me to say, standards of practice again. And of course, that's been a theme over the last few years with the UN Decade and the development of standards of practice. With the launch of the standards of practice next week, these are standards of practice for the UN Decade at the Society for Ecological Restoration Conference in Australia. The standards will be launched, but the next step in the project is to take the 300 recommended practices and build them into a user-friendly tool for practitioners to make sure they get implemented. So towards that end, in October, we're going to try something new in the webinar series, which will be a little more interactive and hopefully be able to have people unmiked and maybe do something like use some whiteboard tools and other kinds of things to get help from you all in the early concepts for development of the tool.